This is The Express with Gary Allen, your 360-degree view of the world. Now, here's your host, Gary Allen.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Express. Gary Allen with you. I hope everybody's had a wonderful week since the last time we were together. Before we go too far, everybody, please, some prayers out there for EW and his lovely wife, who's just had to go through an operation. EW is taking care of her at home. She apparently is going to be all right, but more prayers would be wonderful coming their way. And also to Randy out there, and all of you who are frequent listeners of this program. Just a quick reminder, we've got some great shows coming up for you in the future. We have a fantastic show tonight. And let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman. His name is Michael Berger. He's a multi-talented individual. He's a comedian, author, game show host, broadcaster, keynote speaker. He spent over 4,000 hours on television. He's hosted many television shows on ABC. He's worked for a lot of Fortune 500 companies. He began all of this mishigash on cruise ships, doing stand-up comedy. And when he realized that the 1,500 people in the room didn't run off to the buffet, he said, I'm getting off the ship and I'm going to Hollywood. He's originally from California. He's come tonight to talk about his amazing career in show business, as well as the author of 2 books. One of them is Coloring Your Way to Success, and it's a fantastic coloring book. I don't color within the lines, so I don't know how successful I'll be. And he also co-authored with Ross Schaefer, a game show host that you know from days past, and he's still doing game shows. Absolutely necessary. Excuse me. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Michael's a good friend of mine and someone who I've enjoyed talking to in the past, and I couldn't wait for him to come back on this program. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Mr. Michael Berger. Michael, welcome to The Express, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Gary. I don't know if I can follow your intro.
Well, that's okay. Good night, everybody. We'll just go and watch NBA. Oh, no, it's not NBA basketball season yet. You know, it's amazing. They're talking NBA.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, Michael, it's fine. Yeah. They're talking NBA basketball already, and we're not even through baseball season, and we just got through starting football season. So it's like they overlap each other, and I wish they really, really wouldn't. Michael, you worked on, like I did, on cruise ships for a number of years, and you started filming the audiences and the shows that you did on board the ship, and you said, hey, that was my ticket into getting into Hollywood. How did you get that? Excuse me, into the right hands?
Well, funny story. I was doing stand-up on cruise ships. I was actually at the same time doing warm-up. I was doing warm-up on one of the original dance shows called Dance Fever.
Oh, yeah.
Adrian Zemed was the host, and in the breaks between takes, I would come out and keep the audience entertained. And one of the cue card gals came up and said, gosh, you're very funny. She goes, NBC is doing a pilot for a game show, and they're looking for somebody unknown, undiscovered. And I said, well, let me stop you there. You've just filled out my resume. That's all I am, is unknown and undiscovered. What do I need to do? She goes, well, you have a demo tape, right? I said, of course I do. She goes, well, get that to me, and I'll get it to them. So I leave, and I have no tape. I got nothing. But what I do have is this gig on cruise ships. And I was doing stand-up on ships, and my stand-up act was fine. Mm-hmm. But if I can borrow a phrase from Oprah, my aha moment on cruise ships and what got my career started was the night the cruise director came up to me and said, hey, I got other things to do. And by that, he meant that as a verb. This was the 80s, cruise ships. Mm-hmm. He goes, I don't feel like emceeing the passenger talent show. Would you do that for me? And I said, sure. Now, picture midnight on a cruise coming back from Ensenada, 1,000 people, appropriately lubed up, having the time of their lives, and somebody from their table gets up and does something funny, like America's Got Talent, right?
Right.
And
right.
You'd see things like, gosh, we had an 85-year-old woman tap dance to the Lord's Prayer. We had jugglers. We had people who thought they could sing. It was everything you could imagine.
Oh, God.
And what I realized as I would introduce them was, they were a little nervous, and you'd have a moment with them on stage, and you'd get a few laughs, and then you'd turn them loose. That, for me, I got more laughs doing that. I had more fun introing and having that little interview moment than I did my stand-up. So knowing that I needed to get a videotape and knowing that was really more my skill set than just telling jokes, I went out and I put $2,500 on my credit card, which I didn't have, Actually, I had a couple of credit cards. I didn't have $2,500.
Yeah.
And I bought. No, we're going back. I had to buy one of those two-piece video systems, right? So you had the camera, and then you had the unit that attached, and then a big tripod, and lug this thing on the ship. And I would set it in the back of the room, and I would videotape every passenger talent show that I hosted.
Wow.
I cut this down to 6 minutes, and it was you couldn't believe how excited and how hot the audience was. If people listening have been on cruise ships, you know how crazy it can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I cut this down to 6 months. This tape winds up in the hands at NBC. The executive sees it and calls me in. And he says, "What is this? What am I looking at?" And if you picture a camera just locked off, we're on a ship, so it's gently swaying back and forth with this mirror ball swinging. It's the most unusual reality show you've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And there was a moment that I'm interviewing a contestant who grabs the mic out of my hand, an elderly gentleman, who says, "You must be saying something very funny, but I don't get it." Well, a huge laugh. That's how I end the video, my 6-minute demo. The executive at NBC says, "Do you know why you're sitting here?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, somebody recommended me, and you saw the tape." And he goes, "I'll tell you why. That last comment, the guy got the laugh, and you backed off and let him have his moment." He said, "Any host worth anything knows the importance of making someone else look good at that moment." As Johnny Carson said when they asked him why he was successful, he said, "I never try to be the best guest on my own show," which I thought was a brilliant line, right? I mean, you go through this night after night, right?
Yeah,
trying to make somebody else look good.
Yeah.
So long story short, I get this pilot, and I shoot a game show at NBC. I'm parked 6 spots down from Johnny Carson. I am Mr. Carson. You know, I had a moment with Johnny.
Yeah.
The show does not get picked up. It's a pilot, which, you know, often happens. You do it, and then they go another way, as they say. And that got my foot in the door for what became, what I soon realized, a lot of no's and a lot of we'll go another way. But hey, you know, you get a chance to swing the bat. That's literally how my career started, from from the middle of the ocean.
When I got on the Emerald Seas, which was out of the port of Miami, my uncle
the Emerald, out of Miami. I worked that.
Yeah, and my uncle was a comedian on that ship for years, and they needed someone to be a substitute for a couple of the crew staff as they were going to go on vacation. So what was supposed to be 2.5 months on the ship ended up 2.5 years. I emceed the amateur show like you did. I did the horse racing, the skeet shooting. I even introduced Tubby. And but I never thought about recording anything at the time. I just, you know, because I already had a radio career in Miami, and I was in between doing radio gigs. But I will tell you, and ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Berger will tell you point blank, on ships, people will do and say things that they would never do on land or near friends. Do you want to trade lines? I still remember them from back in the day. I'll give you one, you give me one. How about this one? Do these stairs go down? Go, your turn. Where do they keep the horses for the horse race?
Bingo. What time's the midnight buffet? Go. How about this one? They're putting the pictures out. You know how the photogs would shoot pics during the cruise?
Right.
I'm standing there in the photo gallery, and I hear a family come up behind me, and someone says, "Oh, the pictures are out. How do we know which ones are ours?"
Yeah, I've had that one.
Well,
I've had that one.
Your own DNA, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, and back in the day, if you remember, this is before they had seating arrangements, and if you remember the Emerald Seas, it wasn't exactly like cruise ships today. People would say, "Well, do I have to sit with these people for all 3 meals?" I said, "Well, you can speak to the crew staff, and maybe we can help you out. But yeah, basically, you're assigned to sit at that table." Nowadays, of course, that doesn't really happen. But people are. We had a group of religious church on just around Easter time on the Emerald Seas. Oh, it was funny because I was having a romantic affair with one of the casino dealers on the ship, and she had a twin sister. I had nothing to do with her, but I had to do with her. They kept seeing me coming in and out of the room, and they also kept seeing the twin sister, one go in, one go out, one go in, one go out. Oh. And they went to the cruise director, Gino Conti at the time, and my Uncle Tubby is sitting there playing cribbage. And they're trying to explain about Mr. Allen and his promiscuous behavior with these 2 dealers.
Oh, my gosh.
And Gino says, I know he's having an affair with one of them, but I didn't realize it was both of them. Well, it's inappropriate for people of our faith to be watching this cavorting going on. And Tubby said, well, ask if you can join in.
Well, you know what it
that
did
was
teach
Tubby.
You, and obviously you experienced it firsthand, was it required you to be very clean. My act was clean to begin with, but you had such a cross section, 8 to 80, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was a good learning ground to learn how to work a crowd. And also, if you didn't do well, you'd see these people for the next 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. So you had to learn to play nice, you know. And I learned so much from the ships. I had such a great time. You mentioned you came on briefly and stayed for 2 years. There was a drummer on the ship that I knew that came on to fill in like you, and he stayed 8 years, and he finally got off because he got carpal tunnel playing so much because you play so many shows. But it's a great training ground for anyone to, A, you want to see the world, and B, kind of learn what you do. And, you know, the public thinks you're in show business because you're on the ship and you're on the stage, and they don't see the reality of you getting off and taking your broken luggage to your car and, you know, driving home and trying to find the next gig, you know. No, but I look back on cruise ships and fondly.
Oh, yeah, that was great training. I mean, it was great. I got a chance to be with my uncle quite a bit and other people, and I got to meet some wonderful people on board, and I also got to meet some very interesting people. You have had the opportunity to work.
Let me tag that story. Speaking of comedians, it's a famous cruise ship story about a comic that bombed so badly and was so insulting to the audience that the audience went to the purser's desk and said, "We will not sail with him," and they kicked him off in the next port.
Yeah,
so, Talk about a tough room.
Oh, yeah. I had a couple of friends of mine out of Los Angeles. They did Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, and they got on board the ship. But the cruise happened to have millennials on at that time, and they didn't know who Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were. So they only lasted half of the cruise.
You got to know the room. Got to work the crowd. Got to do your homework. Mr. Saturday Night, go do your homework.
Go do your homework. It's fabulous. You have had the opportunity to work on a lot of talk shows. And you've had the opportunity to work from some very interesting people. You were featured also, I meant to say earlier, on CBS Sunday Morning with Charles Osgood. And you also did an interview program, Moments for TV Land. You hosted Moments and After, an on-the-fly interview capturing people that were on the Betty White sitcom, Hot in Cleveland. How was that? And how is Betty everything that they say she is?
Well, let me unpack about 7 or 8 of those questions you just asked all at once.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Working backwards.
All right.
The show
I'll
Moments
do that
After. No, the show Moments After was me coming out of the stands because I was doing a warm-up on the show and interviewing the stars that just appeared. And anybody that came through Hot in Cleveland came through to solely meet Betty White. It wasn't me. It wasn't Valerie Bertinelli. It wasn't Jane Leaves. It was, do we get a chance? I interviewed Stacy Keach, and I asked him what his week was like, and he said, He goes, I just wanted to meet Betty. I could check this off my bucket list. So the premise of the show was I would go down much like at the end of a football game and grab these moments after with these celebs. Now, in answer to your question, Betty White, I like saying if you think she's nice to animals, you should see her with people. She is one of the most remarkable women. Yeah. She did this show for 5 years. We did 135 episodes. 50 pages of dialogue memorized, would come out, would hug you, would look you in the eye. You wanted her to be your mother, your grandmother. You wanted to spend more time with Betty, and then she would tell you, tell you some joke that would lay you out. She was so fast, so wickedly funny. I remember one of the first episodes we shot, live studio audience, and cameras are rolling. We're in the middle of the scene, and there's this big gap, this quietness. Betty looks up and goes, if no one's saying anything, it's probably my turn. And she that was just this, years of doing it and this built-in ad lib ready to go.
Yeah.
To make, everybody feel okay.
She did the first live shows back when television was live. By the way, you mentioned an old friend of mine, Stacy Keach. I did a television program here with him. I was a 5 and under at the time because my best friend's mother was a casting director. A show that didn't last long had called Carib, which was way back on ABC. It was a detective kind of a show, the predecessor for Miami Vice. But Stacy and I also went to the same church, the St. Jude's Church, right there by Barney's Beanery, right there in right off of Sunset.
Oh, God.
Yeah. You also explain to everybody so they understand.
Well, let me give you, if you don't mind, give you one more shout out on Betty, because she's just, I can't say enough nice things about her. This is the type of person she is in terms of the profession and caring about others. You know, you get these rumors about actors being so self-absorbed and self-centered. Here's a great story of Betty doing a pilot for a sitcom, and I believe it was called Just Men, and Alfred Molina was in it, and it was pilot night. And Betty is so good at dialogue, she would memorize her lines and everybody else's, so she never made a mistake. Opening night, they come out, first scene, Betty makes a mistake. And they go through it, and they get through the show, lots of laughs, all said and done. They do a little post-mortem on the show, and the director went up to Betty and said, "Hey, what happened? Boy, you really had that dialogue down." And Betty, without missing a beat, goes, "Well, somebody had to put a scratch on the new car." So she purposely made a mistake to let everybody else know, okay, I'll take the hit. Now let's go have some fun and do a show. Yeah. I mean, just the humanity and the humility and the wisdom of that woman.
Well, I hope she gets to meet Robert Redford. I hope she gets to meet Robert Redford.
She won't do it. I've talked to her about it. She doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to blow the image. You know, that's her fantasy that she does not want to see it come to fruition.
Well, she was absolutely one. I personally had a thing for Jane Leeves, but then again, that was me. I remember her.
Jane is great. All of them it was such a great ensemble cast, and again, the network. The network was TV Land, and this show ran 5 years. And you always hear in the business the demographics change, and they want to go younger or different. Yeah. When Hot in Cleveland went off the air, do you know the name of the show that replaced it?
No.
The show was called Younger.
Oh God!
And it's still on. Yeah. So how about that? I actually once had a network executive say to me, when I was well past my demo, "Michael, we love your work. We know who you are, but we're going to hire the person that looks like the person we want watching." And I went, "Wow. Okay, I can be a lot of things, but I can't be a 23-year-old." No. Woman. Whatever the demographic was they were after, I was long past that. So that'll get to a story we can have later in the show about how to stay relevant and what do you do when people keep saying no to you? What do you do about that? But
I just in my case in Hollywood, I kept moving forward. That was the only thing I could do, and I'd get depressed.
So that's smart.
I mean, you keep moving forward no matter what happens. You constantly keep moving forward. You have worked with some interesting people. You've worked with doing your talk stuff. But before we get to that, talk about warm-up. How does one get to be a warm-up for sitcoms and stuff? Because people hear that term, and of course it's to warm up the audience. But how does one get that gig? Is it primarily because you were a stand-up?
It's a great question. Stand-ups gravitate towards it, and they quickly learn, this is not what's required of me. A sitcom warm-up is different than let's say a Jimmy Fallon warm-up or a Colbert warm-up, where they come out at the top of the show and they get everybody fired up, and then the show takes off. In a sitcom, I'm the guy that stands there for the 5 hours it takes to shoot 20 minutes. In a average network sitcom, half hour, they're going to have 15 scenes in a script. They're going to do each of those 15 scenes 2, 3, 4, 5 times. They're either going to rewrite because it didn't quite get the reaction they wanted from the audience, this live audience that's sitting there, or they've got to reposition and do a pickup. They got to get another angle. They have 4 cameras, and now they want another angle in. What the warm-up is supposed to do is keep this audience entertained for that length of time. So you're almost like a doctor. You stand up the moment the bell stops and keep them entertained. In my case, my reputation preceded me from the cruise ships and doing that warm-up on Dance Fever. Mm-hmm. Christopher Hewitt, if you remember that name, Mr. Belvedere was one of the celebrity judges who said, "Gosh, you should come do it for our show." And I did, and I wound up doing Mr. Belvedere for 7 years, along with about every sitcom you can mention. Mm-hmm. And the great gig with sitcom warm-up is that it keeps you in town, and you get a chance to showcase what you do. And in my skill set, for me, it was more than stand-up. It was playing with the audience. It was ad-libbing. It was how do you keep them engaged for that length of time. And I would say sitcom warm-up taught me more about the business than anything.
We're talking to multi-talented Michael Berger, comedian, author, game show host, broadcaster, and keynote speaker. He's worked for a lot of Fortune 500 companies. He's on to talk about his amazing career as well as the 2 books that he's created, Coloring Your Way to Success, and co-authored with Ross Schaefer, Absolutely Necessary, which is a book that helps you get past some of your things and goals and gets you more light in an organization. We're going to get to that in a little bit too. Gary Allen here with you on the Express. I knew Christopher Hewitt. He went to the same church as I did. So did Ricardo Montalban, and that's a story within itself. But I would see Stacy Keach all the time, and Stacy was great. Christopher was great. I guess Christopher has gone now.
He's passed, yeah.
But it had to be great working with Euchre because Euchre was hilarious. I mean, he could be his own warm-up.
Here's a great Bob Euchre story. I'm standing in front of the audience, and they're on a break, and Bob has a football in his hand. And I say to Bob, "Hey, Bob, how's the arm? You still got the arm?" And he goes, "Absolutely." And he fires a bullet about 60 feet from where I'm standing without breaking a smile, hits a gal in the head with the ball. She's fine. And then just said, "No, little stiff," and just walks away. I mean, it was that wickedly dry, sarcastic, like, "Oh, I guess not."
Oh, he was great.
Yeah, that group of people you mentioned, Euchre and Hewitt and Stacy Keach, when I got lucky enough to get my talk show, I did a morning talk show on ABC called Mike&Marty. And this guard would come through, the Robert Wagners, the George Hamilton, this group that you don't see much of anymore, came, and boy, did they deliver. In a talk show, network talk show, you get 6 minutes, 12 if they're a big guest, maybe you hold them over one more time and get 18 minutes. And they came prepared. They could do it all. They had stories to tell. They dressed up to come see you. And then you might get, because it was ABC, you might get a soap opera star that was coming through and they wanted to put this person on your show to get a little exposure. And you just saw the difference between someone who's been there and done that and someone starting out, and how they know what 6 minutes meant, or 12, and gave you great TV. So I got a chance to meet every idol I've ever wanted to meet. Jonathan Winters, they initially said, "No, we don't want to do comedy in the morning." So what do you mean you don't want to do comedy? Well, the people at home watching need information. I said, "Well, you can get information. You can get laughs too." And they finally let me have Jonathan Winters on. And he did what I saw him do growing up, which was I brought him a box of hats, and he put the hats on. And it was just, forget about it, I was in my heaven. And I had done warm-up on his sitcom. And, here I'd never met Jonathan. I'm just this guy in the audience trying to make him laugh. And John comes up to the rail and, without missing a beat, whispers and says, "Say to me, Bing, how's your golf swing?" And then walks away. And I go, Bing Crosby, how's your golf swing? And he turns around and goes, well, and does 5 minutes as Bing Crosby. At the end of the show, he comes up and he goes, "Hey, that was fun." He goes, "Let's play like that." Every week, I was waiting for Jonathan Winters to come to the rail, and then I got to ad lib. I mean, that's like taking a pitch from Kershaw. That's the best that it gets. So I would look at him and I'd yell at him, "Sir, are you the guy who invented lettuce?" "Yes, I am." And he does 10 minutes on how he created lettuce. I mean, that's the kind of night it was with somebody like Winters.
I used to go to a restaurant, and they're still probably all over the San Fernando Valley, called Dupar's. And one morning, my wife and I, Grace, are at Dupar's because we went across into the valley. We lived on the Beverly Hills side. And there he is, all by himself in the back, eating, quiet and everything. But on the way out, he's doing a show. And he was so funny. Robin Williams, who was a dear friend of mine. If it wasn't for Robin, I would have never been with the Groundlings to begin with. But you put those two together, and they said on that show, they would run out of film. They just ran out. They couldn't continue filming that day till they got more film, because these two would just go, whoa, into another world all by themselves. Was there ever
here's the story, on that. Let me finish that thought for you, because the Robin Williams and Johnny Winters sitcom was so unique, and that, like you said, they'd just be all over the map, right? And Gary Marshall, the director, would say, "You missed that shot," and the cameraman said, "Well, he didn't stand where he was supposed to stand." And he goes, "Well, go follow him." From that show on, every sitcom to this day now has a fourth camera. It's called the X camera. So you have A, B, C camera, and then X. And X is the handheld that catches all of the other stuff. And that was because of that sitcom. So Will and Grace, to you name it, now has that fourth camera to catch what is not caught often by three cameras.
You have interviewed an awful lot of people. You've been around people, as you said, Robert Wagner, Oprah, Frank Sinatra, Buddy Epson, Burt Reynolds, God rest his soul. I knew Burt somewhat.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, and I say this kiddingly, my dad, Steve Allen, when he would come into the Improv, if Howard and I were both emceeing that night, or we were both there, Steve would come in with Jane and go, are my sons here? And Bud would go, yes, they're both here, and Jamie Lee Curtis, who every little boy had a fantasy about. And of course, the man who I interned with for a number of years in Miami, Larry King, loaned me $50.
Oh, gosh.
Was there ever an interview? Was there ever an interview that you had with someone that going in, you had a preconceived notion of what it was going to be, and it turned out to be a 180 from that?
That's a good question. When you do a talk show, and I think most people probably have seen behind the curtain now with all of the entertainment shows, but for those that are not quite sure how they pull off an hour talk show, the night before a producer calls, and they pre-interview you if you're coming on as a guest, and they give you the arc of the story. And those questions that I'm supposed to ask as a host are written down on cue cards just in my eye line, so that I will now ask this same question that this actor was asked the night before. And that way they protect themselves, and there's an arc to the interview. What I realized early on is that people want a conversation, and they want authenticity. And if it's not going as it went the night before with you, then you got to shift directions, and you got to maybe respond to a question that they asked. And to your point, I knew Robert Goulet as, this great singer and stage actor. The producer that had interviewed him the night before had this series of questions, and she's off camera, jumping up and down, waving this cue card for me to catch what this story was supposed to be. And what she missed was Robert telling this story, the reason he got into the business. His dad was on his deathbed, and Robert went to go see him, and I think the relationship was somewhat strained, and he wasn't close to him. And his father brought him in and pulled him close and said, son, you have a gift. It's your voice. Do that for a living. And he said, that's what I've been trying to do my whole life is please my dad and sing the way he wanted me to sing. And none of that was on the card. And I think it speaks to making someone else the focus of your attention, right? Listen to learn, not respond. People will share some great information if you just let them.
I think that's what talk radio is all about. I have things in front of me about you. We've talked before about a lot of things, and but I leave the door open that if you're going to lead me down a path, and it's interesting, and if I'm getting enjoyment out of it, I know my audience is. And producers sometimes stick to the ABC, and they don't see the in between, the gray areas, which are even more important than a lot of things. I love those behind the scenes stories. I've had Jeffrey Mark on this program. I've had Randy West, Wink Martindale, and Bobby Rydell, people like that tell you stories behind the scenes that really bring you in. Brings the audience in to understand what's going on, which is a question I should have asked you at the beginning, but I didn't, is what got you into I know you're from California, but what got you into this business? Not everybody, let's be honest, not every parent wants their kid to be in show business. I mean, you got show business people, families out there, they don't want their kids in this business under any circumstances.
Well, I had the luxury of being raised by parents who kind of got me, kind of understood me. My dad was a music teacher in Long Beach for 40 years. So he taught music, but he also inspired kids, and he knew the arts, right? To give you some insight to what it was like in the Berger household, if I was in class trying to get somebody to laugh, and the teacher would say, Michael, if you think it's so funny, why don't you get up and share it with the room? I would get up and do 10 minutes. I thought she was asking me to work the crowd. And I'd go home and tell Dad that story, and he thought that was funny. So from an early age, it was okay to get a laugh. The dinner table at our house was very funny. I've got a brother and two sisters, none of whom are in the business, but are very entertaining. And for me, I said, this is what I like. I like the sound of laughter. I like making someone else laugh. I like getting the laughs. And I knew from an early age, this is not an option. This is what I'm going to do. So that's how it started.
When I started doing impressions, it was from the Von Meter first family albums, the Kennedy family. But I didn't know you could earn a living doing this. I mean, I never thought. This was not how I wanted to end up. I wanted to be like my dad. He was a captain for Eastern Airlines. That's where I thought I was going when I was getting out of the Air Force. I flew in the Air Force. I thought that's the direction I'm going in. Something happened. It didn't work out. And thank God, I have a cousin who just retired from United, and he said the airline business stinks now, which we all certainly know and understand. So sometimes life throws you the curve.
What was it like with you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when you were in school, junior high school, were you like me, where if you sat in class and it was boring or wasn't going your way, did you do something to kind of redirect the class? Because that's where I first learned kind of how to work a room. I would say something to the teacher to get the teacher going on another direction to see if we can get the room, a little more enjoyable.
Not really, but everybody in junior high school knew I did impressions, and I was always doing them and being a smart ass. And
what was your go-to impression?
John F. Kennedy. Yes, let me just say this, my fellow Americans. And of course over the years that's increased to Ronald Reagan and other people. But I never thought you could earn a living at it. As a matter of fact, my father said it's all well and good you're doing this, but you realize. And then I turned on the Ed Sullivan Show one night, and there's Frank Gorshin doing impressions. And I knew his cousin out of Pittsburgh, but yeah, there's Frank Gorshin doing it. And then I saw other people doing it and other people doing it. And so that's how part of my act was doing, straight lines and comedy bits, but it was also doing impressions. But when I got to high school, believe it or not, I was very shy. I was extremely shy.
Yeah, I didn't suffer from that. I found great joy in getting people to laugh, and it wasn't shy. It wasn't lampshade on the head stuff, but it was finding your moments, picking your moments, and a lot of Rickles stuff. Growing up watching Rickles, if you could get a laugh out of your group with an ad lib or a cut, then that's what you went with. You mentioned we got off topic a little bit on those great stars. I got to go back to this warm-up business and tell a story if you want to know the behind-the-scenes stuff of a show called Circus of the Stars. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And the network would trot out twice a year their whatever list A, B, C stars, and they'd put them through a series of circus events, and you would be entertained. So I get a call. This is one of the first jobs I ever had in the business. Said, hey, come down and you're going to do the warm-up on Circus of the Stars. You'll go to Vegas. You're going to get a per diem. You're going to meet a bunch of stars. Oh, okay. Yeah, you had me at Vegas. Things shot at Caesars. I got a $75 per day per diem, and I think I got a total of $500 for the weekend. I couldn't be happier. That's more money than I'd ever seen. Mm-hmm. Well, what the reality of it was, picture Vegas, picture tourists, picture this big tent in the desert, people lining up for 6 hours in 100-degree heat to come into a tent and watch Merv ride an elephant. Well, the novelty of that wears off pretty quick.
Yes, it does.
And they would have to construct a trapeze bar. How long will this take? Oh, we'll be done in an hour. I had this audience sitting there for 8 hours as they would reset event after event after event.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, okay, I understand. This is in med school. You make the rounds, you clean out the bedpans, you do that. This is showbiz. This is where you learn what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's the humble beginnings that if you're smart, you never forget and keep honing.
Yeah, you start at the bottom. I remember I've known Jay Leno for a lot of years, and I know at one time he slept on the stage of the Improv at night. Yeah, as a matter of fact, where his star is on the Walk of Fame is where he was arrested twice for vagrancy.
Here's a great Jay Leno story. He was working at a car dealership as a mechanic, and they trusted him to do the bank drop at the end of the night, and he would take the money from the dealership and go to the bank. But Jay was also pursuing this stand-up career. So he finishes and closes up at the dealership and has $9,000 in a paper bag that he's got to take to the bank. But he wants to get to the Improv to do a set first. So he takes the bag of money, and he's wise enough not to leave it in his car. And he goes to the Improv, goes up on the stage, puts the paper bag on the piano, and starts doing his act. And people don't know what the bag is. Maybe it's a bit, rubber chicken. Who knows what's in there, right? Mm-hmm. He finishes the bit. He gets in his car. He's driving home. He gets halfway home and realizes that bag is sitting on the piano with $9,000. He turns around. He goes back to the Improv, says to the club owner, hey, I've got some more material. Do you think I can get back up and try a few more? He goes, yeah. He goes back up, does a little more time, takes the bag, and goes home. No one is the wiser. Isn't that great?
I'll tell you what, some of the stories are just absolutely unbelievable. What did you learn about yourself doing all these interviews and doing the television shows? You work with Christina Ferrara, who I also had a crush on. What did you learn about yourself through all these professionals you worked with, and how has that helped your career move along?
There isn't anybody I've interviewed that doesn't have the same doubt and uncertainty and indecisiveness that I have, you have, anybody else. People have a tendency to look at successful people and say, well, I can't do what they do. I don't have their skill. I don't have their ability. And if you're comparing yourself to Michael Jordan, I'd say, yeah, you're right. However, for the rest of us, we've all got it. And it comes down to your ability to make that decision that, that in my opinion, I start with happiness. I've learned through what I've been through, the ups and downs, the shows you don't get, the family crises. If you make the choice to be happy, you are so far ahead of everyone else. It's Lincoln that said, happiness, you are as happy as you choose to be. And I built my career, I go through life that way, making the choice to be happy. And something I learned with every interview I have, I realize, hey, no different, no better, maybe more messed up than anyone else. I've interviewed Fortune 500 CEOs. I've interviewed the most famous of the famous. And I can tell you this, when they start breaking it down and they tell you the real story, and they tell you as they climb their way to the top and how they sacrificed all their personal relationships. And here they are at the top of the mountain with everything they thought. And they realize, I feel a little empty. And you come to the conclusion that you can't fill that with stuff.
No.
It's not about that. What's your legacy? Who are you? What do you stand for? All those other things that are more important.
I wasn't going to...
long-winded answer to say that's what I learned.
No, that's right. You're absolutely right. We're talking to Michael Berger. He's comedian, author, game show host, broadcaster, keynote speaker, friend of mine. We're now going to talk a little bit about his books. You're on the Express with Gary Allen. And I hope I do this interview justice tonight, because I'm a little nervous interviewing a guy who does this for a profession who's by far better than I am and much better looking than I am. When you look like Jay Leno, you got a negative to start off with.
Well, that's shot from about 700 feet with the right lens. That's why that looks good.
Well, I'll send you a car first thing in the morning. It's one of those things. You mentioned you were talking about success, and in both your books, you and Ross talk about success and some of the things to get you there. And there's so many wonderful points to these books. I hope, for God's sakes, you people go out and get these books, Coloring Your Way to Success, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's a coloring book, and on the back, it has some quotes, some famous quotes, which we're going to get to. But where did you come up with the idea for some of the graphics in that book, along with the quotes?
Well, about 3 years ago, there was this explosion in coloring books, and science has come out and said, look, there's a meditative, there is a scientific proof that you can sort of detox and unwind and calm yourself down through coloring, right? It releases that side of the brain that engages you and takes you out of yourself for a moment. And I looked at these coloring books, and I was doing a lot of corporate speaking, and I noticed the coloring books were great, but they didn't have any message behind it. So what I did is I took 52 of the smartest things anyone's ever said in life about relationships, work, stress, love, loss, you name it. I mean, I've gone back as far as the Bible to present day. And I took what I thought were 52 of the wisest things said, and I took the quote and I buried it in original artwork. I had an artist come up with what was in my tiny brain. So as you color, you don't see the quote initially, but you color and then the quote reveals itself. And then every one of the quotes has a worksheet, and this is where the corporate audience or schools and nursing homes now are using my book as a way to take a group of people, have some fun coloring, but then deep dive into what the quote means. For instance, the first quote in the book, since it's baseball season, is from Babe Ruth, and the quote is, "Yesterday's home runs don't win today's games."
Yes.
Isn't that a great line?
Yes.
And the message is success can be just as detrimental as failure if you and I become complacent. If we just sit around and think we've got it all wired.
Yeah.
Success can give us the illusion things are great, and before you know it, it's not. So that book would have this worksheet that defines the quote. I ask you 3 questions about what that quote means, and then I give you a little Oprah Super Sunday wrap-up of how do I take this quote and apply it to my life. And going back to that quote with Babe, he held the record, right? 714. Right. But the other footnote to that, he also had the record for most strikes outs. So what does that tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's 3 out of 10, Michael, and you're still considered a big-time ball player in Major League Baseball. You know, you hit 3 out of 10.
The last quote in the book.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's a quote that I live by, and it was by Johnny Unitas, a teammate of my brother's with the Baltimore Colts, and it is, if you take no the first time, you'll never get anything done in life.
Sure.
You know. The one quote I wanted to ask you.
Failure is just another opportunity for innovation. Failure is another way to say, let's come up with a workaround. You know, I work in a business where I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA. Here's some numbers for you that illustrate the word no. 185,000 members currently. Of the 185,000, 85% are unemployed at any given moment. Of the remaining 15%, 1% make $100,000 a year or more. So how many times do you think people in that business hear the word no? If you took the first one, like you said, you just crawl up in a ball and not do anything. But instead, you don't let it hinder you. You use it as, like I said, a workaround, a chance to innovate. If we got to get past the no's in life and start focusing on another shot, take another swing at it, as Babe Ruth did.
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to get the door slammed in your face. I think show business builds character. I think it's one of those professions. I mean, I've auditioned for plays when I was at Carnegie Mellon for a while, and even in LA when I would audition for a play, I wouldn't even get a word out, and they'd go next. You know,
sure.
And I didn't even have a chance because it's a cruel world. You don't fit it, and especially for commercials. I was never a commercial type. I don't look like the dad next door. One of the quotes in the book that I love, because when my mother was decorating Jackie Gleason's home, I think for the 3rd time, this is something attributed to him, although it really wasn't said by him originally. And I asked him about it, and he said, absolutely. Be nice on your way up because you're going to meet him on the way down. Yeah.
John Haywood. It's a great quote, and it talks about, you know, being nice to the people because, look, this ladder goes both ways. Yeah. And the story behind that is that there was a boss looking to hire an underling, and they were going to meet at a restaurant. So this boss sets up the meeting, and this hopeful comes in. As the boss sat in the corner and watched this prospective employee come in, he noticed that the employee-to-be was incredibly dismissive and rude to the hostess. He came to the table and sat down to have this interview for what he thought would be his future job, and he didn't realize the job was over before it started. The boss saw the way he treated somebody that he thought was not important and said, that's not the kind of guy I want working for me.
No.
So I think that speaks to being nice up or down, right?
I told you the story.
You talk about you mentioned the no's and going out for auditions and not getting it. This happened somewhat recently, and it's pertinent to our discussion here. You know, I hosted the last version of Match Game.
Right.
And in fact, my business partner, Ross Schaefer, hosted it before me and before him and before him and before him. That show's been around since Gene Rayburn, right, in the 60s.
Yep.
And I got a chance at hosting it, Match Game 98. So I host that. We did 135 shows. We don't get picked up. Number of reasons. Let's just say, you know, time and talent, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
They're rebooting all of these shows, and all of a sudden game shows are back in favor, and you start seeing them pop up, and I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute. Hey, I'm sure I'll be first call. The Match Game's going to come back. And if you've watched recently, if you watched last night, you know who's hosting it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Alec Baldwin.
Right.
So you got to ask yourself, okay, here's what the network is saying. We'll get Alec. Now, Alec's pretty well known, pretty successful, and there was a time where these big stars would think television would be beneath them. And Michael Strahan and Alec Baldwin are realizing, wait a minute, this is the greatest gig in the world. When we shot Match Game, we did 7 shows a day. We knocked out 135 episodes in a couple of months, and we're done for the year. And certainly the money they're getting, not the money I got, but the money they're getting, they can go do their other things, right? So they're now realizing, oh, there's no shame in hosting the game show. And
Strahan does a great job.
Yeah. I think they realize how much fun it is, and those shows will be around forever. They'll just flip different hosts out.
Strahan does a great job. Either my mind is out to lunch on Match Game, but I used to think the questions were a little funnier and a little easier, and maybe the stars, the 6 sitting there, were a little smarter, because some of the answers are just like, really, Alec.
It's a different time. We live in a different culture. It used to be back in the day, whether it was Newlywed Game or Match Game, it was okay to be naughty, but you weren't overt, and that train has left the station. There's not much you can say now that's going to shock anybody, and there's a bit of that coming through on these questions where, maybe we could find another way to write that and be more clever than rude, but hey, I'm not calling the shots here. So
we're talking to Michael Berger, comedian, author, game show host, broadcaster, keynote speaker. We're talking about Coloring Your Way to Success, a new book out. It's a coloring book. He also co-authored a book with Ross Schaefer, another game show host, called Absolutely Necessary, how you can make yourself an asset.
Hey, let me stop you there to do favor to Ross Schaefer. Ross, for the past 20 years, has been one of the most in-demand corporate speakers in the country. He's a consultant to you name it, and he saw the handwriting on the wall. Ross came up with Seinfeld and Letterman and realized, you know what, this may not last, so let me come up with another path. And he took his ability to do stand-up, which he started out, and his ability to host game shows and talk shows, just like me. We became fast friends. I introduced him to the woman he married. He brought me along in this corporate circuit about 5-6 years ago when he said, look, I know this business, and I know what you're going through, and I know how much you love to work. You can take that skill set and still do something else with it if you're not getting a show on the air at that moment. And I salute Ross for giving me that opportunity. And that book, Absolutely Necessary, was the first book I ever wrote. Did it with Ross's help, told my story, he told his stories. And it's really a blueprint of how to keep yourself relevant so you're not passed over either in the next job or the career you've chosen.
Where can they get the books?
The second book? If they wish, if they go to you can get them on Amazon, but if they go to my site, michaelberger.com, I'd be happy to send it to you direct, save you a few bucks, and autograph it. Whichever's easiest, but Berger, like in and out, Burger, michaelberger.com, and there's a way to order it, and it'd be my pleasure to connect to some of the people out there that want to follow up a little further, more information, come out and speak to their group, come out and, I keep one foot in showbiz and one foot in the corporate world because you just never know. You mentioned Christina Ferrari. We did 1,000 hours together on a show called Home and Family, and when that went away and came back, it came back without me and her. Then she jumped in. Now she's gone. But apparently there's a little bit of the public that would like to see us back together. So I won't jinx anything, but let's just say we're having a lunch or two about the possibility of us coming back. So we'll see.
Well, tell her that I love her from afar.
and that's where you're going to stay.
Yes. And because I'm sure her husband is, somebody that.
Tony Thermopoulos. Yeah, Tony. Yeah, Tony's a great guy.
That's nice.
A nice, friendly Italian. There
That's
you go.
Nice. You know what I'm saying? He's a good Irish boy.
I do.
Ross and you, and I don't know, have you ever worked for Matt King with Game Show America?
Many, many years ago, Matt and I connected and never got the opportunity, but he's another guy that wouldn't take no for an answer and creatively came up with a way to engage this corporate market with games and, making these corporate events something more fun than just sitting there and hearing a keynote. And that's what Ross does. That's what I hopefully do, where you try to keep this crowd entertained. I had a CEO say to me, hey, this is going to be a tough crowd. Can you do an hour with them? And I went, if I can keep Mr. Belvedere's audience entertained for 5 hours, I'll be able to handle your group for 60 minutes.
I did a lot of work for Matt over the years. We would do a version of the Tonight Show, and I did hosting. I did MC work. I did game show work. We had a whole lot of fun together. But Matt's retired now, living in Colorado, and he seems to be happy doing that. And I have always wished him so much. You've worked for a lot of Fortune 500 companies, doing keynote speaking, etc. How does your books come into your keynote speaking? I'm sure they do. Some of the advice that you probably give out. I know that they have something that they want to get done for that week, a message. But
let me stop you there. Hopefully we don't give them out. Hopefully they buy them. But yeah. You're right. The book is, as Ross would say, the book is a calling card people don't throw away. You really need something that proves you've got some credibility. The corporate market is actually a little gun shy of hiring TV spokespeople because they think that's all you do. When in reality, this path I chose early on about trying to make some sort of career out of television or showbiz is the same anybody goes through. What do you do next? How do you stay relevant? How are you different than the next person? Why do I need to hire you? So the process of staying relevant, leveraging into a trend, like I did with the coloring book. When I saw coloring books taking off, I thought, well, this is an opportunity. So when I speak, if the company's hiring me, if they're nice enough, they'll buy these books for their employees, and we'll do a little meet and greet afterwards and sign the books. But it's a way to connect the material that I speak about as well with the book and the audience.
You talk
selling
about
your wares at the back of the room, as they say.
Yeah, your jams and jellies. You talk and absolutely necessary about some of about moving forward, making yourself a difference in the company. What do you see? What did you and Ross see putting this together, compiling all this information? What people do to sabotage their own?
Such a good question. Yeah,
to sabotage their careers.
Questions, Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, if you're in a job and you want to advance, you got to make yourself known to the person that can do that for you. And I tell executives to honor the people without title. Who's on the front line doing the work for you? Those are the people that have a story to tell. There's a great example we use of a potato chip company that Ross did a job for up north. Tim's Potato Chips. You probably see them in Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, and they're a high-end little chip. Mm-hmm. And they had a problem. They'd come down the conveyor belt, and all of a sudden a bag would slip through. It didn't get chips in it, got sealed. This box of 24 or 48 would get to the vendor, and they'd open up and go, hey, you sent me a bag full of air. What's going on? They hire a team of experts. They put the suits on, the hard hats, and they go down and analyze this belt and go, here's what you need here. You need a conveyor belt that can weigh the chip, and then an arm will pull it off. $180,000 later, they've retrofitted the plant. Everything's fine. Sure enough, a week, a month later, it fails again, power outage, a mechanical issue, and a bag goes through that's not filled. Mm-hmm. The company looks at one shift, one foreman who has a perfect record of bags being filled, and they don't know how this has happened. This guy's never had a bag go through. What's his secret? The suits and all these really smart people that have been hired and a lot of money paid to go down to see how the guy solved his problem. And he said, without bothering anybody, he goes, I noticed that was the problem, so here's what I did. He tells the story. He went to Walmart. He bought a $25 box fan. He put the fan on medium, and he faced the fan towards the running conveyor belt. And there was just enough breeze to blow off a bag that didn't have chips in it, and the others went through.
Wow.
How's that for underthinking innovation? I mean, you can do something within your company, with your spot, with your lot in life there, that no one else is going to do. We live in this self-absorbed, if you will, culture where we want somebody else to fix it. We want somebody else to do it. I'm telling you, what organizations look for, the CEOs I've met, they want somebody that's got initiative. They want somebody that has accountability. They want somebody that's authentic, somebody that doesn't blame somebody else for their problem. You also
state in the book that for a business to be successful, they must learn to adapt. And it seems like that's a major, major problem with a lot of companies, that they suddenly grow in one area, but they don't learn to adapt and they don't keep an eye on the competition.
Here's my response to that. If you don't like change, you're going to hate extinction. That's Ross Schaefer's line, and I think it's brilliant. Yes, people get a certain level of success, and they think they are set. I did a story on Radio Flyer. On my website, you'll notice something called the Relevant Report, and it's a company I started about 6 years ago, and I shoot 2 to 3 minute video blogs on someone or some company doing something innovative. And Radio Flyer has been around 100 years, and if I say Radio Flyer, what do you think of?
The wagon, the little red wagon.
That's right, the red wagon. So they hit a path there where they were losing money. Now, wait a minute. This is the brand we all grew up with. How could they losing money? Well, the culture has changed. Kids are different. The demands are different. They don't want just a red wagon. So what they started to do is take their legacy, take their brand, and innovate. They've got scooters and razors and all sorts of toys now, $22 billion business that they've leveraged into. Radio Flyer sales have since doubled. They didn't throw away the brand that got them there. And now they've expanded their business because they honor the past and yet embrace what the culture is telling us. You know, we live in this herd mentality. We live in a recommendation economy. You know, did you see the movie? I love the movie. Would you buy that? I'd buy that. Do you like the new iPhone? I do. This is how commerce, you know, in 2018 gets conducted. So you got to, if anybody's listening, trying to figure out their path, you got to listen to what the culture is saying. You do not ignore what people are telling you. It's out there. You just got to spot it.
Yeah, absolutely. You also talk about when people adapt, you cannot blame, no excuses, no surrender, no limits. You just got to keep moving forward. I believe a quote that I really, really liked a lot, and I'm trying to remember it. I wrote it down someplace, and that had to do with laying bricks. Oh, the quote was in your book. I have it here someplace.
Rome was not built in a day.
Yes, but
Rome was not built in a day. But that's right.
They laid a brick every day. They laid bricks every day. You can't be complacent. You have to get going. Even if you do a little something every day in your business and you're not actually making any money, but you're continuing to move forward. And I think that's absolutely correct. Every day I'm doing something for this show, whether it's making connections with booking agents or making connections with somebody I want to interview. Every day I'm doing something because I take pride in what I do. I may not be the best ever, but I take pride in it. Michael, we only have a couple of minutes left.
You've nailed it. That's exactly right. I applaud you for that because people don't know the rest of that quote. They just think Rome wasn't built in a day. But you're right. But they were laying bricks every hour, and that's what we have to do in life is keep laying those bricks.
Yeah, you have to. You absolutely have to. We have had the pleasure of having Michael Berger on this program. He will come back again, I hope. Comedian, author,
I would love to.
Show host, broadcaster, keynote speaker. Hopefully we'll get Ross on too. I'd love to have them both on at the same time. He's the author.
He's my next call. I'm gonna tell him how much I had fun with you, and I'll tell him. I'm sure he'll come back. Maybe we'll come back together.
Absolutely.
I'll leave you with my favorite quote. You ready for this?
Yeah, you got it. You still got a minute to go. Yeah.
Oh, I can speak slowly. Well, let me then take half of this time to thank you because
thank you.
People may or may not know how we connected, but it was through social media, and we found each other. I believe it was LinkedIn, and we're still out there plugging away. Like you said, you're laying the bricks. I'm not giving up, and this is how people succeed. They take initiative. I'm glad you reached out. I'm glad we did this. I'm looking forward to it, and I applaud you for giving people like me the opportunity to keep doing what we do.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you, sir. What do you want people to take away from what they've heard about you and your life and your career, the books you've written, the success you have? Would it be your last statement? Just keep moving forward. Don't let anything stop you, and never take no as the answer.
I'll give you two answers. I want people to make the choice to be happy because success won't make you happy, but being happy will make you more successful. If you can do anything, make that choice to be happy. And the quote that happens to be my quote, it's the last one in the book, is it's okay to look back, but it's a waste of time to stare. I think if we keep looking forward and stop looking back, we're going to be ahead of most.
Yeah,
I'm going to keep doing that, if you will.
Well, listen, I don't know. I'm 65 years old. I can't retire. I don't have those kind of funds, but I also love what I do, and I think that's what keeps me young. I think that's what keeps people in show business young. And I'll just leave it with the fact that I am so pleased to have had you on this program. Hopefully, I'll have you back, and I'll have Ross on and some other folks. And it has been indeed a pleasure. And I hope all of you out there have enjoyed having the great Michael Berger on. And we will have him back again. And we'll be back next week with another show, and it should be a great show.
Hey, Gary?
And, yes, sir.
Gary?
Yes, sir.
In the words of Christopher Walken, it was great. You were great. Gary, it was marvelous. It's a fun show. It was crazy. It was good.
Real quick, Christopher Walken's story. A buddy of mine is in New York. He sees Christopher at a party. He's looking around. He can't see Christopher anywhere. He can't see anything anywhere, but he sees Christopher looking out, and he says, Mr. Walken, is there a problem? He said, yeah, my ride is gone. I don't know where. And so he says, I'll drive you back to Manhattan. I live in Manhattan. He says, great. He says, for 45 minutes, not one word out of him in the car, not one word. And then finally they stop at a light as they got off the George Washington Bridge. They stop at a light, and he turns around and he says, bear suits, they're funny.
Oh, I can't top that. Beautiful.
Anyway,
Perfect
to everyone out there who took the time to listen tonight, thank you. Michael Berger, thank you so much. God bless you all. Until next week, please take care of yourselves and each other.
You've been listening to The Express with Gary Allen. Join us here every Tuesday night at 10 for more captivating talk with Gary Allen. See you next time on The Express.